Credit ratings agency Moody says a ratings change for South Africa is unlikely in the foreseeable future. But lead analyst Kristin Lindow has reiterated last week's warning that we could be downgraded if government did not stick to its commitments to keep debt in check. Francis Hurd spoke to Lindow earlier today. She says South Africa is at a crossroads.
We have a stable outlook on the ratings, so that may seem strange to say that South Africa is at a crossroads, but in reality, after a number of years of seeing the rating under negative pressure, we now see that even though the country is going through a tough time, very low growth for the foreseeable future, difficult fiscal transition from a period of time when the government has had deterioration in public finances to one in which it can finally see the light to stable debt metrics. Those kinds of things I think really matter to us in terms of stabilizing rating outlook. The other thing I think that really distinguishes South Africa is that when you look at institutions, South Africa's institutions look really quite good by comparison to a number of other countries, in spite of the decisions that face the government in terms of its infrastructure bottlenecks, in particular electricity shortfalls.
Okay, that's interesting because you're saying we're stable. Your previous note a few days ago caused a bit of alarm here in South Africa. People saying Moody's is saying we could be downgraded because of debt. Just outline what you were saying. And okay. We speak about South Africa in the past with this fiscal constraint. Then we did take on more debt.
Right.
But government has capped that. Just tell me the risks around that.
Okay. Well, one of the significant changes towards the fiscal accounts that was adopted by the government about 3 years ago is to turn the medium-term expenditure framework into medium-term expenditure ceilings. And what that's meant is that the government has had to live within its scheduled spending on a consistent basis year after year. Planning has to be much more careful, and the ability to spend more than you've set out is no longer available to them. But that's represented a real turning point in terms of the fiscal performance because, as I say, we're finally seeing a point where the debt metrics look like they'll stabilize, and the government can once again look forward to creating the kind of fiscal space it had before the global financial crisis.
I guess you were recognizing that government is committed to keeping down debt. So are you saying as long as we don't change that stance, no downgrade is on the cards?
Well, it's not the only consideration, but it is an important consideration. After all, a debt rating is precisely that. We're saying what the government's ability and willingness is to pay its debt. And less debt in that sense always makes more sense for a higher rating. But I think one of the things, too, is just to recognize that we are at a turning point, but there are still challenges ahead. The fact that we know that the country won't be able to grow very fast in the next few years means it's vulnerable to renewed global shocks, renewed domestic shocks. Certainly the advent of the power shortages towards the end of last year and the fact that people have had to get used to these rolling blackouts is something that's really been a challenge for businesses, and it's arguably damaged South Africa's international reputation.
Can you comment on, there's a new acting CEO that has a lot of confidence behind him of Eskom. Government also talking about selling off assets, and that sparked a lot of debate whether we should go the privatization route, the Chinese route. How are you watching those developments? How is Moody's feeling about it?
Okay. Well, Eskom is an important factor behind the sovereign in the sense that Eskom's constraints represent a constraint on the overall growth of the economy. But Eskom itself, of course, has had financial problems in recent years. It's the electricity tariffs, despite having gone up substantially, are still insufficient to cover the company's costs, and in particular to cover the company's costs of expanding its generation capacity. And so with that, we've become concerned about the company itself, and there's a delicate balance that has had to be achieved between what the government's willingness is to extend support to the company and the company's need for finance. So I think this change in attitude towards accepting external participation in the company is really a recognition that if government is to remain committed to limiting Eskom's support, the company will need to look elsewhere for those financial resources.
Well, Francis heard there speaking to Kristin Lindow, lead analyst of South Africa with credit ratings agency Moody's.